The spit landed 2 inches from the headstone. Not in the grass, not on the path. 2 inches from the stone, close enough that the gravedigger saw it and looked away. Close enough that Pastor Aldridge closed his eyes for a moment longer than a blink. Close enough that all 14 members of the Harrison family, who had driven 4 hours to stand in that cemetery on a gray Tuesday morning, could not pretend they had missed it. Donna Harrison wiped her hand on the side of her black dress, slow and deliberate, the way a woman wipes off something that offended her. The grave itself had done something wrong. That was how she carried herself. That was how she had always carried herself. Her son stood 6 feet behind her. Solomon Harrison, tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a suit that cost more than most people's rent, nodded once. It was not a nod of grief. It was the nod of a man confirming something he had already decided. Beside him stood Tasha Briggs, in a black dress that fit too well for a burial, her hand brushing his arm at the wrist. She smiled at the ground. Not at anyone. Just at the ground. The gravedigger kept his eyes on the tree line. Pastor Aldridge pressed his Bible against his chest. The 14 Harrisons shifted their weight in the wet grass. A child in the back row looked up at her mother's face, trying to understand what the adults were performing, and her mother looked straight ahead and gave her nothing. At the base of the headstone, there was a small, smooth river stone. Dark gray, almost black, perfectly round at the edges. It had been placed there before anyone arrived. Before the hearse. Before the flowers. Before Donna Harrison and her son and his woman pulled up in the black car with the tinted windows. Someone had come to this grave before the burial and placed that stone with intention. No one bent down to look at it. No one asked where it came from. In the middle of all that cruelty and performance and grief that wasn't grief, nobody looked at the one thing Simone Harrison had left behind. The answer to everything was sitting right there at their feet, and not one of them ever thought to ask. Everyone in that cemetery would have told you that Simone Harrison died with nothing. That is what made Donna's performance feel so safe to her. You do not spit on the graves of powerful women. You only spit on the graves of women you believe cannot answer back. Donna Harrison had believed that for years. She had been building that belief carefully, deliberately, the way you build a wall, one stone at a time, one dismissed comment at a time, one dinner table correction at a time. By the morning of that burial, the wall was complete. Simone was gone. The house would follow. The money would follow. Everything would reorder itself the way Donna had always believed it should have been ordered from the beginning. Her son, her dynasty, her name on everything. But she had never once asked whose name was on the land underneath it. 12 years earlier, Simone Bridges was 24 years old and stacking chairs in the fellowship hall of Greater Zion Baptist Church after a Sunday dinner. The hall smelled like sweet potato pie and pine sol and the particular warmth of a room that had just held 100 people. Simone had a system for stacking chairs. 4 high, no more. Grip from the center bar, set them against the wall without dragging the feet. She had helped clean this hall since she was 9 years old. She knew every scratch on every table. Solomon Harrison walked in late, still in his good suit, looking for his mother. He saw Simone instead. He stood in the doorway for a moment, the kind of moment a man doesn't announce, and then he walked over and asked if he could help. Simone handed him a folded tablecloth. He held it the wrong way, bunched in the middle like a man who had never folded a tablecloth in his life, and she laughed before she could stop herself. He laughed too. That was where it started. Not with candlelight, not with grand gestures. With a badly folded tablecloth and a woman who couldn't pretend something wasn't funny. 2 years later, at their wedding, Solomon clasped a thin gold bracelet onto Simone's wrist. It was delicate, simple, the kind of jewelry that doesn't announce itself. He told her it had belonged to his grandmother. He told her it meant that the women in his family were chosen, not borrowed. Simone looked at it on her wrist and felt the weight of being claimed by something that intended to keep her. She never took it off. That bracelet would mean something different before the end. But on that wedding day, under those lights, with her father, Ezekiel Bridges, watching from the front row with his hands folded and his eyes full, it was just a small gold thing that felt like a promise. Ezekiel Bridges died 8 months after that wedding. Heart attack. Quick, the doctors said, as though that was a comfort. He left behind a house, a modest savings account, and a business, Bridges Property Holdings, a small but debt-free real estate portfolio he had built over 30 years in Atlanta, starting with one rental property and growing it the way a patient man grows anything, slowly, carefully, without rushing the roots. The estate was worth just over $2 million at the time of his death. Simone was his only child. She was the sole heir. She was 26 years old, newly married, and standing at a graveside for the second time in less than a year. And the grief was the kind that changes the shape of your chest permanently. She did not read the probate documents carefully enough. She was 26 and grieving and newly married, and she trusted the process the way young people trust processes that seem official. She signed where she was told to sign. She initialed where she was told to initial. She took home a copy of the filing in a manila envelope and put it in the bottom drawer of a desk she shared with her husband. Solomon Harrison read those documents more carefully than she did. He had been reading them for months before Ezekiel died. What he found in the Bridges estate was not just a grieving daughter's inheritance. What he found was startup capital, real estate assets, a deed portfolio, the exact foundation he needed to turn his small development ambitions into something larger. He needed access to that capital without Simone knowing the full picture. He needed a probate filing that listed her as heir, but transferred operational control of the assets to a jointly managed entity, an entity that, on paper, they would both control, but that in practice only he would operate. He found a lawyer who would file it that way. Calvin DeWitt was not that lawyer. Calvin DeWitt had been Ezekiel's attorney for 20 years, and he refused. So Solomon found someone else, someone younger, someone who needed the work. The filing went through when Simone was still in her grief, still trusting, still wearing the bracelet he had told her meant she was chosen. The Bridges estate capital flowed into the new LLC, Harrison Group Properties, was born, and Simone's ownership stake, the founding stake that should have been hers by inheritance, was buried in the paperwork, listed but never disclosed, never discussed, never activated. Solomon believed she would never look. He had watched her grieve her father and sign documents in the fog of that grief, and he had made a calculation about who she was. He was wrong. But it would take years before anyone could prove it. By year 7 of the marriage, the cruelty had stopped being occasional. It had become structural. It lived in the house the way furniture lives in a house. Always there, arranged to serve someone else's comfort. Donna Harrison began arriving unannounced on Tuesday afternoons. She would move through Simone's kitchen with the authority of a woman returning to her own property, rearranging the spice shelf, questioning the menu, setting her purse on the counter in the spot where Simone kept her keys. At dinner, in front of guests, Donna would correct Simone's cooking mid-bite. Not harshly, pleasantly. The way you correct a child you have not given up on yet. Solomon would continue eating. He had been ordering for Simone at restaurants without asking for 2 years by then. He did it without looking up from his phone. She had stopped commenting on it after the first year. Tasha Briggs came into the picture the way certain people come into pictures, gradually, and then all at once. She was a colleague at Harrison Group Properties, sharp, well-dressed, always prepared with the right answer in the right meeting. Solomon began mentioning her name at dinner. Donna met her at a company event and called her refreshing. Within a year, Tasha was attending Harrison family dinners. Within 2, she had Donna's private cell number. What no one at those dinners knew was that Tasha had made Donna a specific gift, not a material one, an informational one. She told Donna quietly, over coffee at a restaurant on Peachtree, that Simone had been speaking badly about the Harrison family name to people in the community, that she had told a woman from their church that Donna was controlling, that she had told a colleague that Solomon's success was built more on luck than skill. None of it was true. But Donna received it the way people receive confirmation of what they already want to believe, with relief, not skepticism. The lie spread through the Harrison family, the way lies spread through families, not with announcement, but with atmosphere. Conversations got shorter. Return calls stopped. Two of Solomon's aunts began treating Simone with the particular coldness of women who have decided something about you, but will not tell you what. Reverend Aldridge, their pastor, the same man who would one day close his eyes at Simone's graveside, was told by Donna that Simone had a spirit of division. He adjusted accordingly. Simone was removed from the Women's Leadership Board of Greater Zion Baptist Church. She found out on a Sunday morning through the printed bulletin, her name simply absent where it had been the week before. No conversation, no explanation, just absence, printed and distributed and folded into the hands of the entire congregation. She sat in her car in the church parking lot for 40 minutes after that service. She held the bulletin in both hands. Outside, families were moving toward their cars, speaking in small clusters, the ordinary Sunday noise of people who have nowhere they urgently need to be. She did not cry. She read her name's absence 3 times. Then she folded the bulletin once, along the center crease, and placed it carefully in her purse. Her hands were steady. She drove home, made lunch, and did not mention it. Not that day. Not ever. Solomon's cousin Deja, warm, good-humored Deja, who had been one of the few people in the family who treated Simone like a person worth protecting, called her that same week. She had heard. She was angry. She told Simone she believed her, that the family was wrong, that she would say something. Simone thanked her. She did not lean too heavily on that promise. She had learned the difference between people who mean what they say and people who mean it only in the moment they say it. Deja never spoke up. She stopped returning calls 2 weeks later. Simone put her number in the same place she put the bulletin. Folded, stored, not forgotten. The diagnosis came in year 10. Simone learned about it on a Wednesday afternoon, alone in a doctor's office on the north side of Atlanta, and she drove home in the particular silence of someone reorganizing everything they thought they understood about time. That evening, a prescription bottle appeared on the bathroom counter. Solomon moved it to the cabinet the next morning without asking what it was. He had somewhere to be. He was already on his phone. She did not tell him the full extent of what the doctors had said. She had watched him carefully for 10 years. She knew what he did with information he considered inconvenient. She had something more important to do with the time she had left than watch him manage her illness the way he managed everything else, on his terms, at his pace, for his comfort. She made an appointment with a different kind of professional. Not a doctor, a lawyer, not just any lawyer. She made one phone call to a name she had found written in the margin of her father's old address book, a book she had kept in the bottom of a cedar chest since Ezekiel died. 3 letters in the margin, in her father's handwriting, C.D., trust him. Calvin DeWitt answered on the second ring. 3 weeks before she died, Simone asked Solomon to drive her to Riverside Memorial Cemetery to visit her mother's grave. He was on a call. He waved his hand in a way that meant no without meaning to discuss it. She drove herself. She wore her good coat, the long charcoal one she saved for occasions that mattered. She carried nothing visible in her hands when she walked from the car to the grave. She was there for just over 2 hours. The groundskeeper, a man named Brother Eugene who had known Simone's mother for 40 years and had watched Simone grow from a girl who visited that grave with her father into a woman who visited it alone, noticed that she knelt at the ground near the plot she had quietly purchased for herself 3 months earlier. She stayed there for a long time. When she stood up, she brushed the knees of her good coat and walked back to her car without looking back. She was carrying nothing visible, but she had left something behind. A sealed waterproof envelope tucked beneath the smooth river stone she had placed against the base of the plot marker. Addressed in her careful handwriting to Mr. Calvin DeWitt, Esquire. Brother Eugene found it 2 days after the burial. He did not open it. He knew Calvin DeWitt's name. Ezekiel Bridges had spoken it with respect more times than he could count. Brother Eugene was 73 years old, and he had spent his life watching what happened when the right information reached the wrong people. He made one phone call. He made the right one. Calvin DeWitt was 71 years old, senior partner at DeWitt and Archer, one of the oldest and most respected black-owned estate law firms in the Southeast. He had an office on Auburn Avenue, 2 blocks from the original Ebenezer Baptist Church, and photographs on his wall that told you everything about who he had represented and what he had protected over 5 decades of practice. He had turned down Harrison Group Properties when Solomon came to him years ago with the probate work. He had seen the structure of that filing from across the desk and understood immediately what it was. He had said no and shown Solomon the door, and then called Ezekiel Bridges' daughter, called Simone directly, to tell her she should have her own attorney review the estate documents. Simone had been too deep in grief to act on it at the time. Calvin had kept the file open ever since. When Brother Eugene called, Calvin drove to Riverside Memorial himself. He arrived before sunrise. He retrieved the envelope. He read what was inside. Then he sat in his car for 15 minutes with the engine off before he picked up the phone. What Simone had left him was not a letter. It was a roadmap. 11 handwritten pages, dates, account numbers, names, observations recorded over years. The date she first noticed the discrepancy in the estate filing, the name of the attorney Solomon had used. The number of the LLC she had found, registered in Tasha Briggs's name, which she had located through a property tax record she had accessed at the county assessor's office on a Thursday afternoon, while Solomon thought she was at a doctor's appointment. The amount transferred into that LLC over 36 months, and at the bottom of the last page in her father's name, Harrison Group Properties was built on Bridges' money. I can prove it. The original documents are in the bottom drawer of the filing cabinet in Calvin's office. He kept them. He kept everything. She had known about the filing for years. She had known about Tasha for longer than Solomon imagined. She had known, and she had waited, and she had planned. Not from bitterness, from precision. She had spent 10 years watching a man who believed that women who endure quietly are women who do not understand. She had let him believe it, right up until the end. Calvin retained a forensic accountant within 48 hours. The financial records told the story in numbers and dates the way Simone had told it in handwriting. 3 years of incremental transfers from marital assets into the Tasha Briggs LLC. Transfers that began 2 months after Simone's diagnosis, which meant Solomon had known more about her illness than he let on, and had begun protecting his assets accordingly. The forensic trail was clean, well documented, and damning. The second revelation came from the LLC filings themselves. Buried in the registered agent paperwork, under a name that appeared in small print on page 4 of a filing most people would have skimmed, was a beneficiary designation. Donna Harrison. She had signed one document. Once. She had done it in the confidence of a woman who believed that one signature in a filing no one would ever examine was the same as invisibility. It was not. The third layer was the original Bridges estate. Calvin had kept every document from his representation of Ezekiel. The original will, the asset inventory, the communications that preceded the probate filing Solomon had used to restructure control of the portfolio. The fraudulent filing was not subtle once you placed it beside the originals. It had been constructed to look technical, to bury the key transfers in subordinate clauses, to rely on a grieving 26-year-old not reading past the first page. The attorney who filed it had since retired to Florida. He would be hearing from DeWitt and Archer's litigation team before the month was out. The fourth and final layer was the one that moved the story from personal to public. Harrison Group Properties, the company, the brand, the empire Solomon had spent a decade building and naming and polishing into a community success story, had been seeded with Bridges estate capital that had never been legally transferred. Simone's founding stake had never been extinguished. It had been obscured. Under Georgia estate law, with the original documents in hand and the fraudulent filing identified, that stake was recoverable. The company, valued at $700 million, had a co-founder whose name had been buried in the paperwork for 12 years. Her name was Simone Bridges Harrison, and she had known it for years, and she had waited until she could prove it beyond any argument. Calvin DeWitt filed the corrected deed of ownership with the state of Georgia on a Tuesday morning. He called Councilwoman Iris Gaines the same afternoon. The Harrison Group Properties annual Legacy Gala was held at the Grand Majestic Ballroom on a Friday evening in November. 400 guests. Black tie. Press cameras at the entrance. The kind of event where the room itself does the work of telling you that someone important has arrived. The chandeliers were lit low and gold. The tables had centerpieces that cost more than some people's weekly income. The program was 12 pages, glossy, and Solomon Harrison's face was on the cover. He gave a pre-event interview to a local television reporter in the lobby, 40 minutes before the doors opened. The reporter asked him what this recognition meant. Solomon adjusted his cufflinks and said that his company's success was a Harrison family story, built from nothing, by people who understood sacrifice. He held the word sacrifice in his mouth for a moment, the way men hold words they enjoy the sound of. When the interview ended, he turned to check his reflection in the dark monitor screen and straightened his tie. Tasha Briggs arrived 30 minutes later and positioned herself near the entrance. Her name had been informally circulated among guests as the incoming VP of External Affairs. She wore a dress that had appeared in a local society column that same week, and she greeted arriving guests with the ease of a woman who believed the room already belonged to her. She touched arms. She laughed at the right moments. She did not look for Solomon when she entered. She did not need to. She believed the night was already decided. Donna Harrison gave the opening tribute. She stood at the podium in a burgundy gown and spoke warmly, smoothly about her son's journey, his sacrifice, his vision. She mentioned his recent personal loss with a pause that was calibrated precisely, long enough to acknowledge grief, short enough to move past it. Simone's name did not appear once in those remarks. In the room where her daughter-in-law's inheritance had funded every chandelier and every centerpiece and every glossy page of that 12-page program, Simone Bridges Harrison was erased so cleanly and so casually that most people in the room did not even register the absence. At table 14, in the middle of the room, an older man in a well-cut dark suit sat with a leather portfolio on his lap and a glass of water he had not touched. Calvin DeWitt did not appear in the program. His name was not in the booklet. He was there as the guest of Councilwoman Iris Gaines, who sat beside him in a deep navy suit, with a folder on the chair beside her foot. Iris Gaines had grown up 3 streets from Simone's mother. She had known the Bridges family for 40 years. She had known Calvin DeWitt for 30. She had agreed to present the award that evening, without telling the event organizers what she intended to say when she stood at that podium. Brother Eugene was in the back of the room. He had come as Councilwoman Gaines's second guest. He was the only person in that ballroom who had been at Riverside Memorial Cemetery the morning Simone was buried. He was the only one who had seen what was left at the base of the headstone. He sat near the back wall in his good church clothes and held his program in both hands and waited. The award presentation was scheduled for 9 o'clock. At 8:55, Solomon was at the head table, relaxed, receiving congratulations from a city commissioner he had known for years. He was in the posture of a man who has already won. Tasha was 2 tables away. Donna was adjusting her bracelet. The room was at full volume, glasses, laughter, the ambient music of 400 people who had eaten well and drunk well and were prepared to witness a celebration. At 9 o'clock, Councilwoman Iris Gaines walked to the podium. The room settled. She was known. She had been in public life long enough that her presence at a microphone carried its own gravity. She set the award plaque face down on the podium. That was the first thing that was wrong. Every person who had attended one of these galas before registered it without knowing they registered it. She opened the folder. She did not look at Solomon Harrison. She looked at the room. She did not shout. She did not perform. She spoke the way a church mother reads scripture at a funeral, not dramatically, but with the weight of someone who knows that the words are doing the work and her job is simply not to get in their way. She said that before presenting any award, she needed to place a matter of public record before the room. She said the name Ezekiel Bridges. Half the room did not know that name. The other half, the older half, the Atlanta half, the half that remembered, went very still. She said that Harrison Group Properties had been founded using capital drawn from the Bridges family estate through a probate filing that had been subsequently identified as fraudulent by the state of Georgia. She named the filing. She named the date. She named the amount. She said these things without drama, the way you say the weather. Then she said that Calvin DeWitt of DeWitt and Archer would like to address the room. Calvin stood slowly. He was not a man who moved for effect. He moved because he was ready. He carried the leather portfolio to the podium and opened it. Inside was a single document, the corrected deed of ownership, filed with the state of Georgia that morning, restoring the founding stake of Harrison Group Properties to the estate of Simone Bridges Harrison. He placed the document on the podium and set his hand flat on top of it, the way you set your hand on a Bible. He said Simone's name once. He let it sit in the room. He said that Simone Bridges Harrison had executed a valid will 11 days before her death, witnessed by a groundskeeper named Eugene Moss at Riverside Memorial Cemetery and notarized on site. He said the sole beneficiary of her estate, including the restored Harrison Group Properties founding stake, was the Bridges Family Community Education Trust, established in her name, to serve the Atlanta community in perpetuity. He said this without inflection. He closed the portfolio. At the head table, Solomon Harrison smiled first. It was the smile of a man who believes he is watching a misunderstanding unfold. He reached under the table for his phone. His attorney, seated 2 chairs down, who had received a courtesy copy of the corrected deed filing that afternoon and had spent 4 hours trying to reach Solomon before the event, placed a hand on Solomon's arm. Solomon looked at him. The attorney did not speak. He did not need to. Solomon's smile changed shape. It did not disappear. It became something else, something that no longer knew what it was trying to do. He looked at his mother. Donna Harrison was staring at the table in front of her. Her hands were flat on the white tablecloth, and she was not moving them. Her signed document, the one she had written her name on believing it was invisible, had been in the folder Councilwoman Gaines carried to that room. Donna had known something was wrong from the moment Iris Gaines set the award face down on the podium. She had spent the last 4 minutes trying to find a way to understand what was happening that would not end where it was clearly ending. She found no such understanding. Solomon looked toward Tasha. Tasha Briggs was already turned away from the head table. She was moving toward the far side of the room, not quickly, not running, but with the deliberate steadiness of a woman who had always known where the exits were. Her name had just been spoken from the podium. The LLC, the account, the transfers, the role she had played, read aloud from the document record by Calvin DeWitt in the same tone he would use to read a grocery list. She reached the edge of the room near the corridor to the exit and stopped. She did not turn around. She stood with her back to 400 people and did not move. The room did not explode. That was the thing no one expected. There was no shouting. There was no dramatic confrontation. What happened instead was silence. 4 full seconds of it. The kind of silence that is not absence but presence. The weight of 400 people understanding something simultaneously and not yet knowing what to do with it. The ventilation system hummed above the ballroom ceiling. Someone's glass was set down very carefully on a table. That was the only sound. Councilwoman Gaines picked up the award plaque from the podium. She placed it back in the bag she had brought to the stage. She walked back to table 14 and sat down next to Calvin DeWitt. She poured herself a glass of water. She did not look at the head table. Then the room began to move. The official financial review of Harrison Group Properties was ordered within 30 days. 3 legal filings accompanied it. The headline ran in 2 Atlanta papers and 1 national outlet that covered black business and wealth, not as a scandal piece, but as a corrective. Bridges Estate at center of Harrison Group Properties ownership dispute. The sub-headline named the trust. It named Simone. For the first time in 12 years, her name was in print in connection with the company her father's money had built. The Community Leadership Award was rescinded by the city in a 1-paragraph letter. No ceremony, no press conference, just a letter sent to Solomon's business address, CC'd to the event venue. He read it alone in his office on a Wednesday morning with the door closed. His contracting partners began requesting meetings that week. 2 of them canceled before they were scheduled. A third sent a letter through their legal team requesting a review of all active agreements pending resolution of the estate matter. Solomon sat across from his attorney in that same office every day that week and listened to the shape of his empire becoming something he no longer recognized. He had built it on a story, the Harrison family story, built from nothing, and the story was gone. What was underneath it was his actual record, and it did not hold. Tasha's resignation arrived by email the following Monday. It was 4 sentences. She thanked the company for the opportunity. She wished the staff well. She did not mention Solomon by name. She did not respond to the 3 calls he placed that week. She was not present at any follow-up events. She did not appear beside him again in any photograph, any room, any context. Her absence was not dramatic. It felt, to anyone watching, like something that had always been inevitable. Donna Harrison attended Sunday service at Greater Zion the following week. For the first time in more than 20 years, she sat in the back row. The church mothers who had always saved her the same seat in the 4th pew from the front arrived to find it empty. No one moved to the back row to greet her. She held her program the way people hold programs when they are not reading them, and opened it once and closed it again. She sat through the service without speaking to anyone, and after the benediction, she was the first one out the door. The signed document, the one bearing her name, the beneficiary designation she had written on a single page, believing it would disappear into the machinery of a company filing, was part of the public record now. 3 women from her prayer group called that week. She did not answer. She was not a woman who had ever had to reckon with public consequence. She had always been the one who delivered them to others. The feeling of sitting in the back row of her own church, in the seat of someone who does not yet know where they belong, was something she had no language for. She had not built language for it because she had never believed she would need it. Solomon's cousin Deja came to the gala that night as a guest. She had been in the room when Calvin DeWitt stood. She had been in the room when Tasha walked to the wall and stopped. She had watched Solomon's face move through its 5 stages in real time. 2 weeks after the gala, She approached Calvin DeWitt's office without an appointment and asked the receptionist if she could leave a message. The message said she wanted to know if there was anything she could do to support the trust. Calvin's office called her back the following day and gave her the name of the Bridges Family Community Education Trust's volunteer coordinator. It was the most the situation allowed her. She knew that. She took it. At the back of the ballroom, after Councilwoman Gaines returned to her seat and the room began its slow reordering, a young woman approached Brother Eugene. She worked the coat check. She was maybe 22, with her hair pulled back and her uniform slightly too big at the shoulders. She had been watching from the corridor when Calvin DeWitt read Simone's name. She had not understood all of it, but she had understood enough. She asked Brother Eugene quietly if he had known her. He said he had known her father first. He said Simone used to visit her mother's grave alone, in her good coat, on days when she needed to remember something. He said she was a woman who planned further ahead than most people knew. The young woman nodded. She did not say anything else. She went back to the coat check. But she thought about what he said for a long time. 3 weeks after the gala, the Bridges Family Community Education Trust held its first public meeting at Greater Zion Baptist Church. Not in the fellowship hall, in the sanctuary. The room was full. Community members, educators, local parents, young people who had heard about the trust and come to understand what it was. Councilwoman Iris Gaines opened the meeting. Calvin DeWitt sat in the front row with the leather portfolio on his lap, the same one he had carried into the grand, majestic ballroom. A church elder stood to read from the Trust's founding charter. He was an older man who had been on the Greater Zion Leadership Board for 30 years, the same board that had removed Simone from the Women's Leadership Committee without explanation, whose printed absence she had found on a Sunday morning bulletin and folded once and stored in her purse. He stood at the podium and read her name in full. Simone Bridges Harrison, founder. He read it slowly. He gave each syllable its weight. He did not rush the name. There is a sentence in the appendix of the Bridges Family Community Education Trust's founding documents that is not required by law. It was placed there by Calvin DeWitt at Simone's written instruction, included in the 11 handwritten pages she had left beneath the riverstone. It describes a thin gold bracelet. Simple, the kind of jewelry that doesn't announce itself. It says the bracelet belonged to a woman who was told it meant she was chosen. It says the bracelet is to be held in the Trust's care and presented to the first young woman from the Atlanta community who earns a full scholarship through the Foundation's program. It says she is to be told the bracelet belonged to a woman who understood that dignity is not given. It is inherited. At the front of the sanctuary, one chair had been left empty, not as theater, not as ceremony. It was the chair where Simone would have sat if she had lived to see this room, this full, warm, purposeful room that her father's legacy and her own planning had made possible. On the seat of that chair was a single smooth riverstone, dark gray, almost black, perfectly round at the edges. No one moved it. No one explained it. The meeting began with it sitting there, in the light, in the front row, at the edge of everything Simone had built, while the world believed she had nothing. The last thing Brother Eugene saw before the meeting opened was a young woman in the third row, maybe 19, maybe 20, writing in a notebook. She had come alone. She was writing down everything. He put on his glasses. He folded his hands. He listened. If you have ever watched someone give everything and receive silence in return, hit that like button. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded today that what is taken is not always lost. Subscribe.